Darren, so is Boris Johnson right for Britain to get involved in direct combat with Russia? What are your thoughts and what do you think as to what's happening now?
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it, that the Prime Minister, both in Poland and Estonia today, where he's been meeting with his counterparts there, and alongside, it must be said, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary-General in Estonia, he repeatedly reiterated that he did not think that it was a good idea for NATO to get involved in terms of no-fly zones over Ukraine, and that NATO is a defensive organisation. Essentially, the bottom line, Nana, that the UK and NATO allies are not going to get involved in direct combat with Russia. The prospect, he said, of British or NATO fighter pilots having to shoot down Russian planes over Ukraine would essentially mean that that would be all-out war with Russia, of course, a nuclear nation. And I think the Prime Minister was trying to make it clear, not just to us here in the West, but of course to the Kremlin, that that is simply not on the table, as he put it. I mean, that certainly would raise tensions. It would make things very, very, very difficult. And it would lead to potentially all sorts of consequences that we couldn't even fathom at this stage. And I think we're a very, 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 very long way from that. I think, in essence, the West has ruled that out. Now, there are suggestions, of course, what if Russia really does get very, very heavy-handed in Ukraine? Will that potentially change the politics of that? Will that change public opinion and pressure here in the West? But at the moment, Western leaders are very clear that that is simply not on the table. In terms of the latest of where we're at, we've really seen Russia kind of ramp up its attacks in Ukraine today, in Kharkiv, which is the second largest city. We obviously saw a massive missile attack on Freedom Square earlier on today. But also this afternoon, we know that 5 people have died as a TV tower in Kyiv was attacked by Russian forces. And we know, as you've pointed out, that thousands and thousands of troops are amassing just miles from the centre of Kiev now, and that it is looking increasingly likely that the Russians are inching the way forward to surround that city. But there is still fierce resistance, of course, from the Ukrainians that makes this very, very unpredictable indeed.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are talking about this Budapest Memorandum, the thing that we sort of signed in 1994 alongside Russia and the United States of America and Northern Ireland. And I'm hearing a lot of people talking about the fact that we did promise to protect Ukraine should they be attacked in this manner. So what is the general consensus with the politicians? I know you said that, you know, we don't want to put the no-fly zone there because that would then be an aggressive act towards Russia. But is it not on us to reconsider our involvement with this and the level of involvement that we're actually currently delivering?
Well, the West would like to think, and Britain as well, that there's kind of 3 prongs to try and convince, persuade, cajole Russia to stop its military action in Ukraine. One of them, of course, is militarily, and we know that lots more countries are now pledging weapons to Ukraine in terms of trying to get those weapons to the front line, though it's proving difficult. Many of them, in fact, are held up in Poland, unable to cross the border. But there is that pledge of more weapons to the Ukrainians so that they can fight and defend their homeland. Clearly, with economic sanctions, the West is hoping to turn the screw on Putin, that his advisors, that the populace of Russia may well decide that this needs to stop, and that will pile pressure on Vladimir Putin to change course. And then there is diplomacy as well. We're expecting further talks, I think, tomorrow on the Belarusian border between Ukrainian officials and Russians, though at the moment that doesn't seem to be going very far at all, not least of all because Russia is continuing to shell and to attack Ukraine, though China suggests that they may well act as a negotiator if there is genuine sense on both sides to try and find a diplomatic solution. I think in the end, Nana, though, this idea that NATO could somehow go further, NATO views itself as a defensive organisation. Ukraine is not in NATO, and so NATO doesn't feel an obligation to defend it. And I think, frankly, as I say, for Western leaders, the idea of taking on Russia in direct military action is a different ball game. It's in a different ballpark altogether. It would mean that British service people and other NATO countries would see their service people, their soldiers their fighter pilots potentially die. And also it means that we are in direct war with a nuclear power. And we do not know where that may well lead to. And in those circumstances, that is why Boris Johnson, Jens Stoltenberg, and frankly every NATO leader is saying at the moment, yes, we will help support Ukraine as much as we can, but this has to be their battle to fight and to win.